Flush draws are an incredibly important hand type. If you misplay these things post-flop, you can really destroy your win rate. Most players tend to either always play them really aggressively or always play them really passively, and today I want to go through 5 different flush draw mistakes that fishy or newer players tend to make with flush draws to make sure you're not making any of these either. Let's get started. Good morning, how are we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka Split Suit. Welcome back to another video, and today I want to review some flush draw mistakes with you. These were all hands taken from my 1-2 vlog. If you're interested, I'll leave a link for the entire vlog down in the description box below. But today, when we go through these hands, I really want you to focus on what is going on here, when we should be taking the flush draws aggressively, and when we should be playing these things more passively. Again, we don't want to just do something every single time without much reason, just to say, oh, all flush draws get played aggro or all flush draws get played passively. That will get you destroyed in the long run. Rather, understanding the unique situation, that is going to be most helpful. So let's get started with this one. Again, all of these hands are from 1-2 played in Orange City, Florida. This first one is with Ace-7 suited. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. A little while later, we find ourselves in the cutoff. Look down at Ace-7 suited. There's a raise to 10 from under the gun +1, 2 calls to our right, and I decide to call as well. And you could make an argument that maybe Preflop is a little bit too loose. However, just my overall thought process when I'm in a game where there's a very fishy player is I tend to play pretty much anything reasonable and get involved in any reasonable pot that I possibly can. Reason being is you never know exactly when their expiration date is, and I'd rather maximize the chances that I make that money rather than letting another reg get that money, who's going to be much tougher to crowbar out of. So that's kind of where I'm thinking about this situation. Ace-7 suited isn't the worst hand in the world, just kind of my overall ethos when it comes to thinking about preflop selection and preflop activity. Now, you could consider squeezing in a situation like this. However, EP2 had been very tight up to this point, and I didn't really see any reason to think that squeezing was going to be all that great, so decided to throw it into my flatting range and go forward from there. So end up getting called by the small blind as well. A 5-way to a flop of Jack 9-3 with 2 diamonds. Bet of 30 from under the gun +1. Call by our friend, and decide to just call here as well. I know a lot of players, when they get into situations like this where they have a nut flush draw and an overcard, tend to get a little aggressive. However, I felt in this situation that if I were to get aggressive, under the gun +1 can definitely have overpairs, and I don't think those overpairs are folding if I get aggro here. My image at this point was a little bit loose, a little bit aggressive, and I didn't see them letting go of those kind of overpairs, which is not great for us. And if they had something like Ace-Jack suited, I don't think that's going to go anywhere either. So I think I'm pretty much hoping that they have something that's going to fold either now or later, and I don't think that's happening enough at the time when they decide to fire a C-bet in a 5-way pot. So that's kind of pushing me more towards put this into my flatting range rather than go for a raise and semi-bluff with my Ace-7 here instead. So the small blind goes away, and we end up going 3-way to the turn. Turn is a 7 of clubs. EP2 checks, bet of 100 by our friend, and decide to call here as well. And again, you could make the argument of considering going for a semi-bluff raise, but I don't really see it doing a tremendous amount. If this person has a jack, I don't think they're going anywhere. If I shove it, if I make a small raise, I don't think any of that's going to accomplish much other than just put in even more chips, hoping that I have an equity edge, which I pretty much never will, against their commitment range. So I'd really be hoping that they have like Queen 10, worse diamonds a lot of the time, 9x that might fold, hoping that Jack X folds, and I just don't see a lot of that being true. So I would rather just call here, actualize my equity, make river decisions, rather than go for a semi-bluff raise right this moment. And also keep in mind that EP2 could definitely have something like an overpair that they're not going to fold either, even if there's a bet raise in front of them. So I don't see any reason to mash it, just decide to go for the call here, take the price, and go forward. So our EP2 friend goes away. River is a 9 of clubs. They check, and I decide to check behind. I don't really see too much reason to fire this. They show a Jack 8 off, and I end up losing this pot. I don't really see the fire doing much. If they have Jack X, I don't think they're going away, so all I'm really doing is punting the times that they have really any decent strong hand, and if they have something like a busted straight draw or whatever, well, I have a pair and that's going to win against that. So much better to just check this behind, hope that you end up running into busted Queen 10. It's not the case in this situation. Okay, whatever. Nice hand, sir. Let's move on to the next one. So you may have noticed that flush draws in pots like these are made more interesting due to the multi-way nature, which of course is quite common in a lot of online micro games or smaller live cash games. So in this next hand, let's look at another situation with a super multi-way pot on the flop, but this time with ace king suited. Alright, this next one we are at the same table, just moved over one seat when the person to my right left. Sitting under the gun, look down at ace king of hearts, raise 2-6, and at some tables this bet size gets the job done, at others not so much. At this stage in the game I thought the 6 was doing okay. Unfortunately it doesn't really seem like it accomplished the goal that I wanted. Ended up picking up 1, 2, 3, 4 callers. Always something to pay attention to, is which raise sizes are getting the job done and creating good situations for you, and which ones not so much, and then adjusting as you see fit. So small blind checks in the dark on the flop, checks to me, and I check on a board of 10-9-6 with 2 hearts. So obviously flopping the nut flush draw is always great, but this is a texture that is really not particularly good for us in the slightest. So I decide instead of firing here, I'm just going to pretty much check my entire range and we'll make decisions. Can always go for a check raise if the situation unfolds so nicely, or just go for a check call. Obviously never going to be check folding here. If the flop gets checked through, we'll just make turn decisions, but I think a lot of players end up making mistakes because on boards that are super wet and right through the middle like this, they tend to c-bet with extremely predictable ranges, and sometimes you can just kind of throw a bunch of extra stuff into your check range, especially in these really multi-way pots, and I think this is a much better situation to do exactly that. So as it ends up rolling out, end up getting checks from everybody eventually. Turn is the king of clubs, checks to me. I fire for 15. I think this should have been 20. I think 15 is just a tad small. End up getting called by the small blind. River is the 9 of hearts. They check. And I decide to fire this for 80. So the main variables to note in this situation is that the small blind is someone who is young, they're loose, and they seem to be pretty darn inelastic. I've played a couple different sessions with them, so I have a pinch of history. We haven't tangled too much, but I pay a lot of attention to what they are doing. And what you mostly need to know in this situation is they can have trips, that's important to note, and they almost certainly never have a boat. So I don't think that they ever really have 10-9 or king-9 and decide to play it this way. And yes, they can have all those hands from preflop. This is just the kind of situation where I think I'm looking at a spot where they are very capped off at second best hands, and second best hands that I think they're going to be fairly inelastic with. And this is the kind of person who does even call the turn with a tremendous amount of like gut shot kind of hands. So again, kind of goes into why I could have bet that turn a little bit larger just overall. This is a really nice situation to overbet. It looks kind of bluffy ourselves. If they have any sort of pair that now turn into 2 pair, I think they're going to continue a very good chunk of the time. If they have trips, they're obviously not going anywhere either. If they happen to have a smaller flush, obviously fireworks will probably end up happening. And again, I probably don't have to worry about being behind all that often. I don't think this person is going to check call turn with sets or 2 pair or any of that kind of stuff. So given all that, I like the larger size bet. Unfortunately, as it rolls out, our opponent ends up folding very quickly. We end up shipping and not having to show our hand, so there's a little bit of a pro to not having to show it, but at the end of the day, obviously would have much preferred getting called. But always look for these overbet opportunities. There's lots of them, especially against kind of those younger, more inelastic players that just really refuse to get bluffed and are very sticky. Look for these situations, trust me. Alright, now let's get on to the next one. So keeping with the theme of playing flush draws and multi-way pots, let's look at another one where I flop an open-ended straight flush draw, and hint, I did not catch the straight flush. And as you're watching this hand, make sure to pay special attention to the discussion on the turn. Let's get started. A little while later, we are under the gun and look down at Queen Jack of diamonds. End up raising to 6. By this point, we've already been giving some of our big stack back, just losing a bunch of small size pots, just kind of adding up. Obviously this is a little bit loose from under the gun, but I'm happy with it overall, and pretty much my overall mentality is if it's a close spot, then just take it because it's good for the vlog. So I'm doing this for y'all. End up getting called by both of the new to poker players, our buddy to the left, and pretty much every other person. I think one guy folded here, so we end up going 6-way to it. and check in the dark by the small blind. Flop is 10-9-9 with 2 diamonds, so flop B open as a straight flush draw. End up c-betting for 20, which you could definitely make an argument for checking this as well, but I think the bet is okay and the size is fine as well. End up getting called by the guy in the small blind, who I'm going to classify as, well, he looks like Keith Richards, but with sunglasses on. So do whatever you want with that information. He checks in the dark on the turn, and I check behind on a 10 of spades. Now, the one thing I'll add here, just because I think it's a little important for context, is there is a high hand promo. Every single time I've played here, there's always this promo. I don't know if it's just because the time of day I play, but I have played on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and it always seems to be running. They have a high hand promo for 500, and that runs, I think, every half hour. So at this point, there's like a couple minutes left in it, and if I end up hitting the straight flush, I am going to have the high hand at the moment, and chances are I'll win the 500. So having a hand like this is actually a little bit interesting, because you do have the open and a straight flush draw. If I were to fire the turn and he check raises with 10x, that puts me in hell because I don't get to see my river card. And if I check behind, I get to see the river card, which could give extra value on top of not only winning the pot, but also the high hand promo. Most of the time, I'm not going to suggest people freak out or make a bunch of strategic overhauls about high hand promos, but this is one of the rare spots where I'm considering it, at least slightly. And you can make an argument for firing the turn for sure. Get things like pocket sevens, pocket eights, or other diamond draws, other straight draws to go away here. But at this point, I just went for the check behind instead, see if we can improve on the river. Unfortunately, we do not. River is a 7 of clubs. He does not check in the dark this time and decides to fire out for 35. And this is one of those where, what am I really going to do here? I mean, it seems like a pretty easy spot to go for the fold, just because am I really going to raise and get him to fold a boat? I don't think so. And I don't think I can really hero call with queen high, I just don't beat quite enough hands. So I don't really see any reason to give this action. I just end up showing it because the table just absolutely goes bananas over anything that had a possible chance of winning the high hand promo, and I don't really see much reason to, again, pay this off or do anything that much different, especially on the river. So he ends up taking a moment and shows us a 9, and we rock and roll and go onward to the next hand. Hopefully the next one will win, but at this point it's been kind of a downward coaster and I'm not holding my breath. So if you're interested in going even further on this queen jack suited hand, definitely make sure to check out the standalone video I did going in even more depth here. I'll leave a link in the description box or one of those card things up there if you're interested and want to go even nerdier into this exact spot. Otherwise, let's continue on and look at a spot with a flush draw and overcards in another multi-way spot. A little while later, find ourselves in the small blind again. Raised by the hijack, call by the cutoff, call by the button, down at queen jack suited. Decide to call here as well, and this could be a squeeze some chunk of the time, but given the stack sizes of the cutoff and button, didn't really want to do that. You can make an argument that given those stack sizes might be a little thin on the call side, which is totally fine. I can totally get on board with that. Flop though is lovely, 9-7-5 with 2 spades. I check, lead by the big blind for 11. Call by the preflop raiser. Raise to 25 by the cutoff. Call by the button. And I decide to raise this to 115 total. Alright, so a couple of things to consider here. First and foremost, yes, you can make an argument that I could lead this spot instead of just going for the check, but I thought this was going to be the kind of spot where there would be a bet by the big blind or the preflop raiser, a call or two in front of me, and then I could make this exact kind of check raise. Wasn't expecting this exact action, but it happens. But after I check, we have to keep in mind that the big blind did only fire 11 into roughly a $50 pot, which is definitely on the small side of the spectrum. Sure, he and I could definitely have a tremendous amount of the strong combos here, just given middling board and the way this is all going to run out. But I don't know, I don't think 11 into 50 is his I have a really strong hand here a lot of the time kind of bet size, and also the just call by the preflop raiser is one where I don't think he necessarily wants to play for stacks either. So given that, I pretty much in between the cutoff and the button for a decent chunk of the stack off potential, and against them I'm definitely not going to be folding overs and a flush draw, so I just decide to go for the raise. If I call here, I'm definitely inviting both the big blind and the first raiser to come along as well, and I just think that spot's going to be a little bit gross, so decide to go for the raise myself, punish it, and go forward from there. So continuing on with the hand, big blind folds, preflop raiser folds, not too shocked about either of those things. Cutoff gets it all in. And the button ends up tanking for about 2.5 minutes before finally folding. End up getting shown the bad news, pocket kings by the cutoff, and unfortunately ace 8 on the run out, no spades, and end up shipping the pot right over in that direction. So totally okay with the play itself, just would be nice to actualize my equity in this spot, but not all draws improve, this one being one of them. So let's continue on and see how the rest of this session ends up hammering out. So enough with queen jack suited examples, let's look at a spot where I take an atypical line with ace king preflop and end up flopping a flush draw and have to play this thing out of position. Let's fire it up. A while later we are in the big blind. Our friend open limps under the gun. Strong play. 2 more limps. The button decides to attack to 15 down at ace king suited in the small and just decide to call this. And well, obviously I like to play ace king very aggressively preflop overall. This is a situation where I think flatting is a pinch better because the button had been so darn tight in the session with any amount of preflop opening and especially isolating. So I didn't really see 3-betting doing a tremendous amount other than just absolutely punishing myself against a very nuttish range. And while I don't particularly love playing ace-king in a very multi-way pot that tends to get very bloated very quickly, I do prefer doing so with the suited variant much more so than the offsuit variant. So that is factoring in here at least a little bit. But again, really make sure you know who the open raiser or the isolator is preflop before you just blindly 3-bet. I think a lot of players get themselves into trouble because they just automatically fast play ace-king preflop, and while overall that's typically a very good idea, there are definitely nittier opponents or nittier ranges in select situations where I think it makes a little bit more sense to be a bit more cautious. So keep that in mind, and that's why I like flatting rather than 3-betting in this exact situation. So as it rolls out, our friend to the left decides to limp fold. Not really sure what's happening. One of the other limpers decides to call, end up going 3-way to a flop of 8-8 deuce with 2 diamonds. I check. Both of us end up checking over to the button, who decides to c-bet for 30. And I just decide to call here. I think calling is going to be much better than going for the check raise, just because what are you really check raising in a situation like this? And I'd also kind of like to just call here, let the original limp caller from preflop also continue. I'm very good with that coming along as well. Even if they have something like pocket 5s, pocket 6s, something that would definitely fold against the check raise, I think they have enough hands that can check call here that get some extra value from. And is my opponent on the button really going to like bet fold if they have something like jacks on this board and I decide to check raise? I don't think so. Again, I think I'm really just punishing myself against a very nutty range, and I'm not even sure this person would always decide to see that in a multi-way pot with something like ace king here. So because of that, I think check calling is going to be better than going for the aggressive check raise. So after we call, the other player unfortunately goes away, end up going heads up to the turn, which is a very beautiful 7 of diamonds. I decided to lead this out for 30, and I think it's important to talk about why I like leading here as opposed to going for the check raise or even a check call. So one of the biggest things is I want to guarantee the money goes in right this moment. One of the worst things that can happen in my opinion is that this streak goes check, and then it is very difficult to get stacks in on the river, whether it's a clean river, nasty river, it doesn't really matter. I think it's just going to be difficult to get stacks inside. And the big thing that's going through my head right now is we are playing 1-2. And your typical 1-2 opponent, again, especially given the notes and information I gave Preflop about this player being tighter, especially on their opens and their isolations, I think this is someone who could mistakenly check back here with even something like pocket jacks with no diamond and look at this spot and just say, I'm just going to play it a little bit more cautiously, because they're fearful that the diamond popped off, even though they don't think a step ahead and say, oh, well, why not? Why let a fourth diamond roll off for free? They don't think that far. They just think, oh no, a flush improved, I should slow down and get cautious. I really do not want to miss out on value when our opponent has jacks with a diamond, jacks without a diamond, or any other hand. And pretty much everything that I think they would isolate with preflop and then decide to c-bet a multi-way flop with, I think is going to continue right this moment. So because of that, I want to guarantee the money goes in. One of the easiest ways to do that is just to bet yourself rather than risk that turn getting checked back. Now, as for the bet size itself, this is where things get a little bit interesting, and this is where we kind of get into the science versus art form of bet sizing overall. So if you're looking for information on the science part of bet sizing, definitely make sure to check out my new book, GTO Gems. There is a bunch of information about bet sizing, why multiple bet sizes in GTO is very important, how to formulate bluff to value ratios given different bet sizing. Grab your copy at GTO Gems today and get actionable insights from our years and years of solver exploration and analysis. That way you don't have to do all these solves on your own, you just get to get the big major takeaways and figure out how you can start putting them into your playbook immediately. Again, GTO Poker Gems is the name of the book. You can find it at redchippoker.com/gems or look for it on Amazon if you prefer the paperback or Kindle. Again, GTO Gems, enjoy it. But if you're looking for the art form of this is what I think is really factoring in this exact situation, because again, I want to guarantee money goes in. I want to try to set it up for stacks on the river, and if we bet 30 or larger, we pretty much set it up for a pot sizer on the river at minimum. So that's a good thing for me in a situation like this. However, I don't want to go so large that our opponent ever considers folding an overpair, with or without a diamond. I think that would be the absolute worst thing that could happen here. And I think at 75 plus, that's going to happen more often than I'd like it to. Again, just given the fact that this is a 1-2 player who is on the tighter side of the spectrum, definitely seems a little bit more nervous and skittish. And as such, I don't want to risk them going away with that. I'd rather get 2 smaller calls than risk them folding to a bigger bet right this moment. So because of that, I think somewhere between 30 to 45 is going to be just fine. I really don't want to go 50 plus just from a price point, a psychology price point at this specific limit. So because of that, I think something like 40 is probably a little bit better. 30 is just a tad small, but again, at least I'm betting. But if I was going to tweak this a little bit larger here, I think would be a pinch better. So all of that being said, we do fire out for 30. Our opponent pretty quickly calls. River is a 5 of hearts. And I fire for 140, leaving myself $10 back. I don't know what's with me in this hand and just like $10 of weird, stupid mistakes, but this is 2 streets in a row where I think $10 was just completely messed up. I really don't know why I bet 140 as opposed to just the rest of it, which again would have been 150 total. Happy I'm betting, obviously, not going to be checking. I think we have to fire and try to get value from our opponent. Again, from all of those overpairs that just cannot find the fold button, and honestly, why would they? Our opponent finally puts in the call, shows me jacks, no diamonds, and a nice little payoff is coming our way. So again, I think I missed $10, but there are worse things than missing just a $10 bet on the river. But again, I think it is very important to get very detailed with these kind of things. And the biggest thing in terms of the overall betting line, again, is preflop, the consideration of flatting versus just generally 3-betting, and also the turn, whether or not you lead there or you just go for a check. And again, I think leading is going to be a little bit better in this situation. Alright, cool. Let's get on to the next one. No complaints about the nice result, but again, the turn donk, which is normally viewed as an action only fishy players make, is the key to ensuring that our hand gets max value here, or at least max value minus $10. And by the way, if you want to go even deeper with this hand, I would highly suggest checking out my book, Optimizing Ace King, which will take you through everything you need to know about playing Ace King at an advanced level, both pre-flop and post-flop. Just visit splitsuit.com/AK, again AK, to learn more, pick up up your copy, and if you want the paperback version, it's also available on Amazon. And just for giggles, I thought I'd go through a bonus hand with you as well. This is a spot where fish will pretty much never ever get that last bit of thin value, and in this case, I value bet with a 6-eye flush on a 4-flush board. I know it sounds ridiculous, but let's review it together. This last hand of the night, we're playing 4-handed as the table is winding down in the big blind. Cut off folds. Button is that very, very weak player I was talking about earlier. They decide to limp the button. Small blind decides to raise to 5. We have 6-4 offsuit and decide to call as well. Again, playing 4-handed, and we're going to be getting involved with a very weak player a lot of the time. Yes, 6-4 is not particularly strong, but this should do just fine given the overall context of the hand. The flop comes out King 8 5 all hearts. We have the 6 of hearts in our hand and decide to fire for 7 after the small blind checks. I assume the small blind's going to let it go a lot of the time, button will continue a lot, and we'll just make decisions from there. Turn is the 7 of hearts, and I decide to fire for 10, which at this point you may be thinking, why the heck are we firing with the 6 of hearts when there are 4 hearts on board? Yes, we have a flush, it's a playable flush, but it's not particularly great. The real reason is a couple fold. One, our opponent is very, very bad, which means second best hands can and will continue. It's not like they're only going to continue if they have a heart in this scenario. It's just not the way this person had been playing. They will call for chops in situations where they are never ever really going to be chopping. And also, there's just a lot of value to be had here. They're never going to bluff raise me, and if I check, they're just going to check behind pretty much all the time anyway. So I can get a small bit of value both on this turn and also on the river a good chunk of the time if I use smaller bet sizing. Yes, I'm not going to be able to bet near pot and expect to get a tremendous amount of value, but smaller sizes against these specific kinds of players can do very, very well. So not shocking, we end up getting called. River is the 3 of hearts, and I decide to continue firing. And well, it looks like I have a straight flush. I do not. So it probably seems a little bizarre, but again, not shocking that I'm going to get looked up by a second best hand from this particular opponent. They end up calling down with ace 5, no heart in their hand, and ship a nice one with a very, very silly little one. But again, when you're playing against these specific kind of opponents, you can get away with making these kind of plays, and you're never going to get punished. Even though that small size looks a little bit silly and should get punished, it really never does against players just like this. So be on the lookout for spots like this in your game too. So all in all, the results for these 6 hands came out to plus $81 or 675 BB per 100, which isn't too bad. And of course, we don't want to overdraw anything from a very small sample size of 6 exact hands, but by the same token, this at least gives you a ballpark on some different ways that you can be improving your own play with flush draws. Again, notice where some of the players would take a default line of over aggression or under passivity, and really thinking about situations where we can play these hands optimally, or at least way better given the exact situation you have at hand. And again, these multi-way pots, very common in smaller live cash games, and you really have to know how to navigate these. Even with flush draws where things can get a little bit awkward, it's very important that you understand how to play these hands better. And again, all of these hands were included in my 1-2 vlog. If you're interested in watching the entire vlog, I'll leave a link for that down in the description box below, or you can check out this playlist that should be somewhere on the screen at some point. But hopefully you enjoyed. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. And if you want more compilation videos like this that are wrapped around a single theme, and especially pulling out hands from the vlog, definitely make sure to give this video a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate it, and it helps me know exactly what you want to see in future videos. But as always, thank you so much for hanging out today. I look forward to seeing you back in another video shortly, and in the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.